Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is you want me to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Teacup, Godflesh, Like Rats. Godflesh are the genre-defining band of industrial metal. Their debut album, Street Cleaner, for which Like Rats is the opener, from 1989, still holds up. So, let's dive into this. Interesting that that's on this week as well, since our theme for the week was album openers. So that's pretty cool. All right, let's dive into this and see what's going on with Godflesh. Oh, that is shrill. Oh, really interesting width removal. There's so much emptiness on the outsides now. It feels anemic, and that bass is just punching through. Interesting layering on the vocals. A lot of dissonance just in that. So it's the guitar tone that gets expanded out? Okay. Timbre is really important in this style. Yeah, really pay attention to the sounds of the instruments right here. We'll be talking about that later. Interesting, all this is on the offbeats. All right. So, this was interesting. Musically, it's not very complex. And honestly, if this was in a more traditional rock or metal context or just any more traditional song, the sonic landscape was more traditional, I think I'd have very, very little to say about it. It is it's an aggressive track. It has very simple eighth note ideas and quarter note ideas. There's not a lot of rhythmic diversity going on. There is one chord. We don't have a progression. We are in a chord for the entirety of the song. Um, so there isn't even an emotional element that can come out of that because a chord by itself, I mean, it kind of has properties, but a lot of chordal resonance comes from a progression of hearing a series of note intervals and getting the overall picture from that. One note by itself, yeah, yeah. Well, see, here's the thing. One note by itself can have properties, but it's because we understand it in relationship to another. Minor kind of sounds sad because we understand minor is sad comparatively to major. So when you just have a song like this with one chord and no context to it, it doesn't really have an emotion tied to it. Um, and so it just is. It is a darker chord, but I don't get an emotion out of it. It just isn't bright. Um, and then like so we pair that with the hyper aggressive, heavy attacks on all of our instruments, vocals, bass, guitar, drums. Everything just has this really da dun da dun da dun. These really harsh attacks at the beginning of their notes. Da da da, just really sharp playing. And that's pretty much it for the music. There's one other situation musically that I think I want to talk about, and that's our solos. And that's just random noise. I don't know how it's produced. It might be the guitar, it might not. But it is just squealing, screeching pitches, microtonal, I'd say. I don't think I heard. It felt like a lot of these notes were sliding into each other, so we were getting a lot of tonality between the notes, but it was just seemingly random noise and pitches. Um, so nothing I can really pull out of that. And like I said, if this were any other situation, that would be the end of the analysis. It's a a simple track, not used as a negative word. I'm not looking down on the track. It just doesn't have a lot of things going on with it musically. And the one time that it decides to play into something a little bit more melodic and different than the rest of it, it is just noise. It doesn't actually take the opportunity to play a catchy melody or to tell a story through melodic form. But there's some interesting things going on in here that are beyond the music. First, we have the production, and I thought this was interesting. I don't know what to make of it yet. We start off the track with this supremely wide guitar sound, and it just fills this space. And we don't know that it's filled space yet, but it's a very large sound overall. We get out of our opening into our first chorus, verse. I'm honestly not sure. Just our B section, the second section we were introduced to, and it's very empty. All that sound that was around us on the sides is gone. And it took me a couple repetitions of this to really hone in on what's going on there. And like I had mentioned at the beginning of this section, I think our guitar sound is just wider during our bigger moment. It's this it's this enveloping tone. Whereas when we get to the smaller section, the guitar is very pointed. It's very condensed. It is just as you hear it. It doesn't have any extra width to it. Um, and again, I'm not 100% sure on this. There could be some other instrument at play here that comes in during the bigger section and fills out the sides. But the end result is that we have something that feels both large and small at different times, and the smallness gives a sense of emptiness on the outsides of the sound. Again, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to make of this information, how to interpret it, but it was such an affecting moment. The first time we hit that not the quiet section, but the smaller section, and it just felt like there was so much space in the sound sphere. They just emptied all this noise out, and honed it down from something that was very wide and blunt to something narrow and sharp and piercing. And I thought that was really interesting, especially since without the extra width there, our lead instrument isn't this massive guitar tone. It becomes this really wide bass sound. It's not as wide as the guitar was, but it isn't it's not a very pointed guitar sound either. It has a lot of uh, shape to it. It's a very big sound, and it just dominates everything in these moments when we have just it and our narrow guitar and our vocals and drums. Um, Speaking of timelessness, our requester stated that the song sounds just as good now as it did when it came out in '89. And yeah, I could see this as a modern track. In fact, I actually hear a lot of similarities between this and Author and Punishment. And I think Author and Punishment is also industrial metal. It sounds very similar to this, but of course, he doesn't use traditional instruments. He makes all of his own instruments that feed into MIDI, where this sounds like a traditional metal band. But the end result, the music that is crafted out of it, sounds very similar, especially in the production. This sounds like a modern song. And that's impressive, I think. Um, a lot of music tends to sound like its era, primarily due to just standardized production techniques of the time or the reach of hardware or software eventually of the time and technology. And like there's a lot of things that limit or contain a sonic identity of a track and place it within a specific era. And this feels and sounds very modern. That's cool. Now, I think the last thing we're going to hit before we wrap this up, it's going to be a day of short videos. Um, I had mentioned during the reaction, I was like, listen to these sounds right here. We're going to be talking about them. The specific timbres of the drums, of the guitars, of even the bass and the wailing guitar during the solo section, the bridges, they all have a very specific flair to them. They all sound mechanical. Maybe even taking that a step further and saying they're very machine-like. And I think that's really interesting. It seems to me, a lot of the production on instruments in rock and metal, and when I say production, I do include crafting a guitar tone, just as much as what the engineer is going to be doing with EQing and stuff like that. Isn't necessarily aiming for anything in particular, just trying to find something cool, right? A guitar sound that, gets you amped maybe. You're like, it gets me amped, it's going to get someone else amped. This is my guitar tone now. This is all very blunt, very flat, I'm not going to say that any of it gets me pumped up from the sheer tonality of it. But what it does do is sound like pistons, or in for the snare tone, it sounds like steel on steel. It all sounds very machine-like. And so when you get to the screeching sound of the bridge, it really doesn't sound out of place in a factory. In fact, this whole song sounds like it could just be the rhythmic chugging of very rigid machines in a factory, in a warehouse maybe. There are some machines that operate on such rigid cycles that there is a rhythmic pulse to how they operate. And when you have several of these machines together, they could create something that sounds like a song if their cycles happen to start around the same time. And that's exactly what this music begins to feel like to me. And I find that exceptionally impressive. And I'm curious, it said that this was the origins of industrial metal. I'm curious if that's why it was called industrial metal, because it sounds very much like being in a factory, surrounded by industrial machinery that makes banging and scraping sounds all day long, but in a musical sense. But the fact that they achieved this in '89 in a way that both sounds like metal and sounds like being in a factory and really elicits that imagery is pretty crazy. But it really clicked for me about three-quarters into the track, and I was like, dang, they really nailed the sound, the industrial sound. This sounds like machinery, and they're doing it with guitars, bass, and drums. It's kind of phenomenal. I think that's really all I have to say about this before we head into the lyrics. Yeah, so let's do it. This this just seems like straight up um I don't know, nihilism possibly. Uh Very aggressive misanthropy possibly. There's not a lot of words here. Every other stanza is you breathe like rats. The stanzas in between speak about the negativities, that the negative views that this person has on, I'm going to assume, humanity. It says you have stylized deformity, you drop like flies. It says you fade out, you lie, and you conform. It says don't look back, you were dead from the beginning. I just covered every single line in this track, um, right there. And that's kind of my take on it. It's a very negative view on humanity. I don't know. I mean, there's obviously a darkness and an aggression to the music. The vocals are delivered with that raspy, harsh yell. I don't remember what the vocals sound like now. Um, so like the aggression in the lyrics is certainly felt in the music, but the only thing I could really draw attention to, oh, I forgot to talk about that. All right, well, we'll circle back on it in a second. But the only thing I think I could really tie them together would be an interesting perspective that the vocalist or lyricist feels more at home with machinery than they do with humanity, and so the music that surrounds them is one of metal. Rap. Oh, there's two metals here. There's steel the metal and the genre metal. That's pretty good. They feel more at home surrounded by metal than they do surrounded by flesh. And their disdain for humanity is reflected in the fact that the sound that surrounds them is so far divorced from something human, um, that they had to actually craft the guitars and drums to sound like machines. Again, I might be reading a little too far into that, but I do think it's an interesting coincidence. Um, the one thing I wanted to cycle back in on, going back to the idea of the instruments sounding like machines, they also operate like machines. There is a real rigid element to the rhythms of the music. We primarily work with quarter notes and eighth notes, and once we have a rhythm, we don't change it for an extended period of time. It makes the song a bit more repetitive, but it leans really hard into that machine-like rhythm of finding a groove and staying with it. Because unlike humans, you might find a new groove, machines don't. They're programmed to operate within a very specific, rigid style, rigid cycle. And so I think it's interesting to hear the music, what is on paper, reflect that. Not to mention, what was it? Oh, yeah, the wider guitar in our first section, now that I think back on it, almost sounds like a hissing or smoke coming out, as a natural part of the machine cycle. So yeah, everything about it just kind of leans into this idea of factory machines. And there's so many nuances in both the composition and the production that really help elevate that general visual I get while listening to this. All right, those are my thoughts on Godflesh's Like Rats. What did you think? Did you enjoy it? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to correct me on or add on to what I stated? Put that stuff down in the comments. Above the comment section is a description box. In there, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I just went backwards on that, but whatever. We have a creator request coming up today as well. I'll also be here tomorrow for the album review. Sunday we'll have our live stream in the morning. Fingers crossed, no network issues, no blocked portions of the video. I'll have it up by 5 p.m. that night, Eastern Standard Time. 5 p.m. as usual, like with everything else. We didn't get that happening on Sunday because we had technical issues. It ended up being two separate streams according to YouTube, and I had to go stitch them together and render out a new video, and I decided to do some effects while I was at it. So, yeah, by the time it got all rendered out, which like took 2.5 hours, and then I had to upload it, which the internet speeds were weird because I was having network issues, it just wasn't available on time. But assuming none of that happens, it will be on time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday, uploaded for everyone to watch. All right, I think I rambled on enough here. Till next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.